30,000 feet above the Rockies. Flight 409 was supposed to be a routine red-eye, but when two heavily armed F-22 Raptors suddenly flanked the wings and the cockpit went dead, panic erupted. The only thing standing between 200 souls and absolute disaster was the quiet woman in 14B. The fluorescent lights of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport flickered with an exhausted hum, casting a pale glow over the boarding area for Transglobal Flight 409. It was 11:30 p.m., and the passengers waiting to board the red-eye to Dulles International were a miserable portrait of fatigue. Among them sat Major Harper Reed, completely swallowed by an oversized grey hoodie, her face half hidden beneath the brim of a faded baseball cap. To the untrained eye, Harper was just another exhausted millennial nursing a lukewarm black coffee. She didn't carry a military duffel. She didn't wear combat boots. There was absolutely nothing to suggest that less than 48 hours ago she had been strapped into the cockpit of an F-35 Lightning II, pulling 9 Gs over a classified airspace in Eastern Europe. She was officially on leave, rotating back to Joint Base Langley Eustis, and all she wanted was 6 uninterrupted hours of sleep in a civilian economy seat. Boarding was called. Harper shuffled into the Boeing 777-200ER, finding her window seat in row 14. She shoved her small backpack under the seat in front of her, buckled in, and leaned her head against the cold acrylic of the window. "Rough night, huh?" A voice boomed to her right. Harper suppressed a sigh and turned. The man sliding into the middle seat was in his late 50s, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and carrying the unmistakable energy of a man who loved the sound of his own voice. "You could say that," Harper murmured, keeping her tone polite but final. "Bill Danvers," the man said, extending a hand. "Regional sales for Apex Logistics. Heading to D.C. for a summit. Nothing like flying in a metal tube overnight to really get the blood flowing, right?" "Harper," she said, briefly shaking his hand. Her grip was firm, calloused from years of gripping a flight stick and pulling ejection seat handles, but Bill didn't seem to notice. He immediately launched into a monologue about his company's supply chain issues. Harper nodded at the appropriate intervals, her eyes scanning the cabin out of sheer habit. Situational awareness wasn't something you could just turn off. As the plane taxied and took off, Harper mentally catalogued the environment. 3 flight attendants in the economy section, a crying infant in row 22, and 3 men sitting in row 8, just behind first class, who hadn't touched their in-flight magazines, hadn't reclined their seats, and hadn't broken their rigid posture since they sat down. One of them, a broad-shouldered man in a charcoal jacket, kept glancing toward the front galley. His eyes weren't the eyes of a nervous flyer. They were the eyes of a predator timing a strike. Harper recognized the look. It was the same look her squadron commander had right before a combat sortie. She closed her eyes, trying to dismiss her paranoia. "You're off duty, Reed," she told herself. "Stop looking for a fight." 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights were dimmed to a soft blue. The steady drone of the massive twin turbofan engines had lulled most of the passengers to sleep. Bill Danvers was snoring softly, his chin resting on his chest. Harper was drifting in and out of a light doze when the subtle change in cabin air pressure popped her ears. She opened her eyes. At the front of the cabin, the heavy reinforced door of the cockpit was open. The first officer had stepped out to use the lavatory. It was a standard procedure. The flight attendant was supposed to block the aisle with a beverage cart while the door was vulnerable. But the cart wasn't there. Instead, the broad-shouldered man from row 8 was moving. It happened with terrifying, practiced efficiency. The man lunged forward, slamming a dense, rolled-up magazine into the first officer's throat. The pilot collapsed instantly, gasping for air. Before the flight attendant could even scream, a second man was out of his seat, driving a smuggled ceramic blade into the attendant's side. The third man, the leader, stepped over the gasping pilot, shoved his way into the cockpit, and violently yanked the captain out of his seat. The heavy cockpit door slammed shut. The lock clicked. In less than 10 seconds, Flight 409 had been hijacked. The cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers screamed as the first 2 hijackers turned to face the cabin, their hands dripping with the flight attendant's blood. The broad-shouldered man, his face a mask of cold fury, raised his bloody ceramic knife. "Nobody moves," he roared, his voice echoing over the terrified shrieks. "Stay in your seats, keep your heads down, and you live. Anyone stands up, I will sever their carotid artery. Do you understand me?" Beside Harper, Bill Danvers jerked awake, his face draining of color. "Oh my God," he whimpered. "Oh my God, what's happening?" Harper didn't answer. The sleepy civilian persona was gone, vaporized in an instant. Her heart rate steadied, dropping into the icy, hyper-focused rhythm of a combat pilot in a hot zone. She kept her head down, her eyes tracking the hijackers from beneath the brim of her baseball cap. Suddenly, the massive Boeing 777 lurched. The nose pitched down aggressively. The engines whined as the throttle was pushed forward. The plane was entering a steep dive. Unsecured bags flew out from under seats, sliding down the sloped aisle. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling compartments, dangling like plastic jellyfish in the dim light. "They aren't landing this plane," Harper realized, feeling the G-forces press her back into her seat. "They're going to use it as a missile." The aircraft was descending at a terrifying rate. Alarms were likely blaring in the cockpit, but out in the cabin, there was only the roar of the engines and the hysterical sobbing of 200 trapped souls. "Put your heads between your knees," the hijacker in the aisle screamed, pacing like a caged wolf. He was trying to maintain control through sheer terror. "Heads down! Now!" Harper didn't put her head down. She turned her gaze to the window. Outside, the pitch-black sky was beginning to lighten with the very first hints of pre-dawn grey, and in that faint light, she saw them. Ghostly silhouettes cutting through the thin air, matching the Boeing's speed with terrifying precision. Twin tails, diamond-shaped wings, and the unmistakable, predatory geometry of a fifth-generation stealth fighter. F-22 Raptors, 2 of them. They had appeared out of nowhere. Flying so close, Harper could clearly see the pilot in the lead aircraft looking toward the passenger plane. The Raptors banked sharply, intentionally rocking their wings. It was the universal military signal for an intercept. "Follow me, or be fired upon." "Fighter jets." Bill Danvers choked out, pressing his face to the glass next to Harper. "They're here to save us. The military is here." Harper's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. "No, Bill," she whispered, her voice deadly calm. "They aren't here to save us. They're here to shoot us down." Bill stared at her, horrified. "What? If this plane is heading toward a populated area, a city, a military installation, the capital, and it doesn't respond to radio contact, they will blow it out of the sky to minimize casualties on the ground," Harper explained rapidly. Her eyes locked on the F-22S. She knew the protocol, because she was the one who usually executed it. The pilots in those Raptors were her brothers in arms, and right now, they were waiting for authorization from NORAD to launch an AIM-120 AMRAAM missile right into the Boeing's fuselage. She had maybe 3 minutes before this plane was turned into a fireball over the Midwest. "I need to get to the front," Harper said, unbuckling her seatbelt. Bill grabbed her arm. "Are you insane? He has a knife. He'll kill you." "If I don't get in that cockpit, we're all dead anyway," Harper said. She didn't raise her voice, but the absolute, unshakable authority in her tone made Bill freeze and slowly let go of her arm. Harper slipped out of her hoodie, leaving only a tight black t-shirt. She needed to move fast, without loose fabric for the attacker to grab. She checked the aisle. The broad-shouldered hijacker was standing near row 10. His back turned to her for a fraction of a second as he yelled at a crying woman. Harper moved. She didn't run. Running was loud. She slid up the aisle with the silent, fluid grace of a ghost. By the time the hijacker heard her footsteps and spun around, raising the ceramic knife, it was too late. Harper ducked under his wild slash. She stepped into his guard, driving the palm of her hand upward into the base of his chin with bone-shattering force. As his head snapped back, she grabbed his knife arm, pivoted her hips, and executed a flawless, brutal judo throw. The man slammed into the floor of the aisle with a sickening thud, the breath exploding from his lungs. Before he could recover, Harper brought her knee down on his collarbone, snapping it, and wrenched the knife from his grip. He went limp. The second hijacker, standing near the front galley, let out a furious scream and charged her. Harper didn't hesitate. She threw the ceramic knife. It buried itself in the man's thigh. He stumbled, howling in pain. Harper closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbed the heavy metal coffee pot from the galley counter, and smashed it across his temple. He collapsed in a heap. The cabin was dead silent, save for the roar of the descending plane. 200 passengers stared in absolute shock at the young woman in the baseball cap, who had just dismantled 2 trained killers in less than 15 seconds. Harper didn't look at them. She dropped the dented coffee pot and moved to the heavy cockpit door. It was locked from the inside. The keypad was useless. The leader would have flipped the manual deadbolt. Through the reinforced door, she could hear the muffled voice of the hijacker, screaming into the radio. He wasn't trying to fly the plane. He was pushing the yoke forward, aiming for a target on the ground. Harper looked at the keypad, then down at the unconscious hijacker at her feet. She searched his pockets, finding a small, heavy black device, a breaching charge, a small-shaped explosive designed to blow the hinges off a reinforced door. They had brought it to get into the cockpit, but the first officer, stepping out, had saved them the trouble. Harper grabbed the explosive, slapped it against the magnetic lock mechanism of the door, and hit the primer. "Everyone get back!" Harper roared at the first few rows. She ducked behind the galley bulkhead. 3, 2, 1. Crack. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. Acrid white smoke filled the front of the cabin. The heavy door blew inward, hanging off one mangled hinge. Harper stormed the breach. The man inside, Gregory Dunn, a rogue mercenary whose face Harper vaguely recognized from intel briefings, was strapped into the captain's seat. He turned in shock as the door blew open, reaching for a sidearm he had smuggled aboard. Harper tackled him. In the cramped, flashing chaos of the cockpit, it was a brutal, close-quarters brawl. Dunn was bigger, stronger, but Harper was fueled by adrenaline and years of elite tactical training. She pinned his arm to the console, but in the struggle, Dunn's elbow violently smashed into the center pedestal, hitting the switch that broadcast the cockpit communications over the passenger cabin PA system. "Get off me, you bitch," Dunn roared, trying to gouge her eyes. Harper gritted her teeth, shifted her weight, and drove her elbow straight into his nose. Cartilage crunched. Dunn's eyes rolled back, and he slumped sideways in the seat. Harper scrambled over his unconscious body, ignoring the blood on her hands. She grabbed the yoke, hauling it backward with all her strength to pull the massive 777 out of its fatal dive. The plane groaned, the metal airframe shuddering violently as she fought the immense aerodynamic pressure. At the same time, the radio on the console was blaring. It was tuned to the international distress frequency, 121.5 megahertzes. Unknown civilian aircraft. This is the United States Air Force. A stern, stressed voice crackled through the speakers. Because Dunn had hit the PA switch, the military pilot's voice echoed not just in the cockpit, but through the entire passenger cabin. "You are entering restricted airspace and are on a fatal trajectory. Divert your course immediately, or you will be intercepted with lethal force. I repeat, you have 10 seconds to pull up, or you will be fired upon." Harper knew that voice. She knew that call sign. Still fighting the yoke to level the plane, Harper grabbed the radio mic with her bloody left hand and hit the transmit button. "Ghost 2-1. Hold your fire. I repeat, hold your fire," Harper barked, her voice echoing through the cabin PA, ringing in the ears of Bill Danvers and 200 terrified passengers. There was a stunned silence on the radio. Then, the F-22 pilot's voice came back, entirely stripped of its robotic military protocol. "Wait. Reed? Major Reed? Is that you?" "Affirmative, Ghost," Harper grunted, the muscles in her arms burning as she finally leveled the aircraft at 10,000 feet. "Hostiles neutralized. I have control of the aircraft." In the passenger cabin, a collective gasp rippled through the seats. Bill Danvers stared at the empty seat next to him in row 14, his jaw on the floor. Over the speakers, the F-22 pilot let out a breath that sounded like a laugh of pure disbelief. "Copy that. Damn good to hear your voice, Valkyrie. We were 3 seconds from splashing this bird. You have the con. Follow us in. We'll escort you to Andrews." "Appreciate the escort, Ghost," Harper replied, her voice cooling back into the calm, professional drawl of a seasoned fighter pilot. She adjusted the autopilot, finally catching her breath. "But tell the boys on the ground to have some fresh coffee waiting. It's been a hell of a flight." The adrenaline rush that had propelled Harper through the cabin began to wane, replaced by the cold, heavy reality of the cockpit. She wiped a smear of Gregory Dunn's blood from her forehead with the back of her wrist and strapped herself into the captain's seat. The Boeing 777-200ER was a colossal machine, heavy and sluggish compared to the hyper-responsive F-35 Lightning II she was accustomed to flying. Outside the shattered cockpit door, 200 passengers remained frozen in stunned silence, their lives entirely in the hands of the woman in the blood-stained black T-shirt. Outside the windshield, the two F-22 Raptors glided effortlessly into tight formation. Their sleek, radar-absorbent fuselages catching the first golden rays of the morning sun. The sight of the American military might flanking her wings was usually a comforting image, but Harper knew they were not out of the woods yet. Ghost 2-1. I have a heading for Joint Base Andrews, Harper transmitted, her eyes rapidly scanning the primary flight displays and the intricate overhead panel. But as she checked the engine indication and crew alerting system, a sudden cascade of amber and red caution messages flooded the glowing digital screens. Dunn hadn't merely attempted to crash the aircraft into a populated center, he had initiated a catastrophic system purge before Harper knocked him unconscious. Ghost. We have a major problem, Harper broadcasted, her voice tightening as she deciphered the failing systems. The flight management system is completely degraded. I am losing hydraulic pressure in the right wing, and my primary avionics are rebooting. Dunn locked out the main computer. Copy that, Valkyrie, the F-22 pilot replied, his tone shifting from relieved to gravely serious. Can you maintain altitude? Negative. I am losing pitch authority, she said, pulling back on the yoke. The immense physical resistance of the controls indicated that the fly-by-wire system was failing, forcing her to rely on manual mechanical linkages. The saboteur initiated a fuel dump. The crossfeed valve is jammed open. We are venting Jet A fuel straight into the atmosphere. I do not have the range for Joint Base Andrews. A tense silence followed over the radio. In the cabin, Bill Danvers finally unbuckled his seatbelt and cautiously crept toward the shattered cockpit doorway. He peered inside, his eyes widening at the sight of Dunn's unconscious body, zip-tied to the jump seat, and Harper wrestling with the massive flight yoke. Major? Bill asked, his voice trembling as he used her military title for the first time. Are we going to be okay? Harper didn't look back, her eyes locked on the artificial horizon on the display. Sit down, Bill. Strap in tight. Tell everyone to assume the brace position. We are going down fast, and it is not going to be gentle. Where are we landing? Bill stammered, looking out the window at the dense suburban sprawl of Virginia rushing up to meet them. We are not making it to a runway, Harper replied, her voice eerily calm despite the blaring master alarm. Ghost 2-1. Be advised, I am declaring a critical emergency. I have less than 4 minutes of fuel remaining in the center tank. I am diverting to Interstate 66. Clear the highway. Valkyrie, you are attempting to put a wide-body commercial airliner down on a public interstate? That is suicide. It is my only option, Ghost. Get local authorities to block the eastbound lanes near Centerville. I am coming in hot. Harper disengaged the autothrottle and manually pulled the thrust levers back. The massive Pratt & Whitney engines spooled down, their comforting roar replaced by the terrifying whistle of rushing wind. She was essentially flying a 300,000-pound metal glider. Every ounce of her tactical training, every simulator hour, and every combat mission she had ever flown culminated in this single, impossible descent. She banked the crippled airliner aggressively, ignoring the screaming ground proximity warning system. Terrain, pull up, the automated voice barked. Harper tuned it out. She focused entirely on the stretch of grey asphalt cutting through the Virginia trees. Suddenly, the plane violently shuddered. The right engine flamed out, starved of fuel. The asymmetrical thrust violently yanked the nose to the right. Losing engine 2, Harper yelled, stomping on the left rudder pedal to counteract the aggressive yaw. Ghost, tell them to get fire and rescue on that highway right now. She was dropping at 2,000 feet per minute. The trees were practically scraping the belly of the aircraft. The morning commute on Interstate 66 had just begun, when the Virginia State Police received the most terrifying dispatch in their history. Troopers scrambled, throwing spike strips and setting up blockades to stop eastbound traffic, completely unaware that a Boeing 777 was plunging from the sky directly toward their position. Inside the cockpit, Harper's muscles screamed in agony as she fought the heavy, unresponsive yoke. She reached down and slammed the lever to deploy the landing gear. Nothing happened. The hydraulic failure had paralyzed the landing gear doors. The green indicator lights remained completely dark. Gear is unresponsive, Harper transmitted, her breathing heavy. I am going to have to belly land this bird. Ghost, get out of my airspace. The debris field is going to be massive. The F-22 Raptors banked sharply away, climbing rapidly to avoid the impending catastrophe. Harper was entirely alone in the sky now. She looked at the altimeter. 500 feet. 300 feet. Through the windshield, she could see the highway. It was horrifyingly narrow, flanked by concrete barriers and dense pine trees. If she drifted even a few feet to the left or right, the massive wings would clip the trees, cartwheeling the aircraft into a fiery explosion. "Brace for impact," Harper roared over the PA system. She heard the muffled, terrified screams of the passengers echoing from the cabin. 100 feet. She pulled back on the yoke, trying to flare the nose and bleed off airspeed. The plane groaned in protest, the metal fuselage stressing under the unnatural aerodynamic load. 50 feet. The highway signs rushed past the windows in a blur of green and reflective white. 10 feet. Crunch. The belly of the Boeing 777 slammed into the asphalt with earth-shattering force. A horrific screech of tearing aluminum and grinding metal drowned out every other sound. A massive plume of sparks erupted from beneath the fuselage, trailing a river of fire behind the aircraft. The impact threw Harper violently against her 5-point harness. The cockpit windows shattered instantly, showering her in safety glass. The wind roared into the cabin, a deafening hurricane of debris and smoke. The aircraft skidded down the interstate at 140 miles per hour, acting like a colossal, uncontrollable missile. The left wing sliced through a highway overpass sign like a hot knife through butter, ripping the signpost out of the concrete foundation. The friction was melting the bottom of the aircraft, filling the cabin with thick, acrid smoke. "Stay on the center line. Stay on the center line," Harper grunted through clenched teeth, her hands locked onto the yoke, using the rudder to keep the plane from veering into the concrete barriers. Gradually, agonizingly, the friction began to win. The speed bled off, 100 miles per hour, 60, 20. With one final, violent jolt, the nose of the crippled airliner buried itself into a grassy median, and the massive machine finally ground to a sudden, absolute halt. Silence descended over the wreckage, broken only by the hiss of deploying evacuation slides and the distant, wailing sirens of emergency vehicles. Harper sat frozen in the captain's seat for 3 agonizing seconds, letting her heartbeat slow down. She unbuckled her harness, her hands shaking violently now that the adrenaline was gone. She turned around. The cabin was a disaster zone of deployed oxygen masks, scattered luggage, and thick smoke. But as she looked down the aisle, she saw movement. People were unbuckling. People were standing up. They were alive. Bill Danvers stumbled toward the front galley, coughing heavily but entirely uninjured. He looked at the mangled cockpit, then at Harper, who was covered in dirt, blood, and glass. "Major," Bill whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You saved us. You actually saved us. Get everyone out," Harper commanded, pointing to the emergency exits. Now, within minutes, emergency personnel swarmed the highway. Fire trucks sprayed the smoking fuselage with thick white foam, while heavily armed FBI tactical teams breached the aircraft to secure the bound and unconscious form of Gregory Dunn. Harper was the last person to slide down the emergency chute onto the foam-covered asphalt. She stood in the damp morning air, shivering slightly as the magnitude of the event washed over her. A sleek black government SUV pulled up to the perimeter, and a sharply dressed military officer stepped out. He walked directly past the frantic emergency crews, ignoring the chaos, and stopped right in front of Harper. He saluted sharply. "Major Reed," the officer said, his voice filled with profound respect. "General Command sends their regards. The President has already been briefed. You did the impossible today, Valkyrie." Harper returned the salute slowly, her eyes drifting back to the smoking wreckage of Flight 409. And the 200 ordinary people standing on the side of the highway, wrapping themselves in emergency blankets and staring back at her in absolute awe. She wasn't just another passenger in 14B anymore. She never would be again. "Just doing my job, sir," Harper replied quietly. "Now, if you don't mind, I could really use that cup of coffee." Did this intense story of Major Harper Valkyrie Reed keep you on the edge of your seat? The courage of our armed forces often goes unnoticed until the unthinkable happens. If you enjoyed this heart-pounding aviation thriller, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of heroism. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Stay safe, and we will see you next time.